have a very unstable connection with Kyiv. The ambassador has literally moved heaven and earth in order to be with us today, and we may lose her at any moment. So I'm going to start the meeting right now and ask her for her opening statement. It's only in the last 5 or 10 minutes we actually knew that we were going to have the ambassador with us. So, Ambassador, thank you for all your efforts to be with us. I know you're in a very difficult situation, and so I'll just ask you for your opening 5-minute statement, and then members will move to questions. And colleagues, at one point we were going to collapse the whole meeting into one. Now we're back to what was in the published notice. So there we are.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, honorable members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity for me to address to you today. I'm addressing you from Kyiv, which just from Ukraine, where just half an hour ago there was another alarm and sirens were allowed in many regions of the country. Today, we face a big cyber attack on the biggest mobile operator. That's why millions of people in the country have no access to their cell phones and to the internet connection. And we are facing, as I will brief you today, that Russia's attacks are not only in the war on the battlefield, but that's also the attacks as a hybrid war, as a propaganda, and also the attacks on the cyber attacks on the critical infrastructure. According to the General Staff of our armed forces, Russian Federation continues to wage the war of aggression despite the significant losses. So from the beginning of full-scale Russian invasion up to today, Russia already lost over 339,000 of personnel, 5,600 tanks, 10,500 APVs, over 8,000 artillery systems, 324 aircrafts, 324 helicopters, and over 6,000 of UAVs and 1,500 cruise missiles. But it does not stop Russia continuing the war. Today, the heaviest fights are on the east, near Avdiivka, near Liman, and near Kupiansk. Despite the heavy losses and the average losses of Russian troops in one day in November exceeds 800 people. Despite that, Russia continued to use the tactics as they used near Bakhmut, just throwing the people into the fight and not taking really into account the losses. And also Russia continues to attack critical infrastructure. Just yesterday, 8 ballistic missiles where Russia launched 8 ballistic missiles over the Kyiv region because, and thank you for also Canada for providing us air defense system. All of these 8 ballistic missiles were intercepted. And over the night of December 11, Russia also launched 18 Shahed drones, trying to use the same strategy as Russia did last winter, attacking critical infrastructure and trying to deprive people from electricity, from mobile connection, and the level of the UAVs Russia is using, it's over now 3,000 of Shahed type drones that Russia have launched over Ukrainian critical infrastructure. Over 300 cruise missiles, 23 ballistic missiles, and only for Kyiv was the recent times there were 400 Shahed drones. And we see that Russia does not stop its attempt. As we understand and as we estimate, Putin wants to his own propaganda inside the country to show any small achievements of Russia is putting enormous efforts and suffering huge losses, trying to get either some small community or some major step forward and does not count on any losses, both of equipment and the personnel. We are holding the line, and in some regions we are advancing. Of course, it requires for us, first of all, artillery shells, air defense system, armored vehicles. And I would like to thank you, Canada, for being a partner in all of the major coalitions that we had together with our partners. Today, we have 54 countries who are the member of so-called Ramstein Coordination Platform, all of the NATO countries plus non-NATO countries. And I would like to thank you for all of the military support that Canada have provided for the training of Ukrainian soldiers. It's crucially important. And for us, now the top 5 priority needs for Ukraine, as we are moving to the winter air defense, first of all, to protect civilian objects, to protect the cities. Ammunition is needed in a big scale, and ammunition is something that we need on a daily basis, and this is one of the top 5 priorities for us. Armored vehicles, we thanks for Canada for announcing the support of further supply of the armored vehicles, and we really appreciate if they can be sent to Ukraine, delivered in the nearest future. And also important thing for us is the UAVs, because now on the front line, a lot of UAVs and the system of the electronic warfare also to protect our soldiers, to protect our army on the front line from the Russian UAVs. The new system of electronic warfare are of the high priority. Also, what we do on our side is put a lot of attention into also the strengthening Ukraine defense sector. On the 29th of September, we launched in Kyiv a big defense capabilities forum where the companies, 250 major players from countries all over the world participated in the forum, and now bringing and building the partnership between the defense sector companies, Ukrainian and our partners, including Canada. And we look forward for this partnership as one of the ways to build the defense capabilities and defense production with those companies in Ukraine. And thank you for having me, and I will be ready to answer all of your questions.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. That'll turn us to our 6-minute round. Mr. Kelly, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Ambassador, for being with us today, and good to see you again. And please accept my best wishes for your safety and the safety of all of your people amid this ongoing horrific illegal war of conquest being waged by Russia. What does Ukraine need from Canada right now? What would your priorities of your government be?
Thank you. Indeed, the top priorities, what I've mentioned, are the ones that we are discussing also with Canadian government. Of course, the armored vehicles, artillery shells, drones, electronic system of warfare, and very important also part of the support which we are really grateful for is the training programs, and we appreciate the training programs what we have and their continuation, because it helps also for us to, with those newly conscripts and specific, whether we are talking about the medical evacuation personnel, demining, engineering, all of the trainings are of the importance, and that will be also important to continue the Unifier program and the trainings for the future.
Thank you. So you've talked about the need for armored vehicles, light armored vehicles. Would Ukraine benefit from if Canada were able to retrofit the LAV-2s that are being decommissioned? We understand they can be reconditioned, and I wonder, would they be useful to Ukraine?
Thank you. Actually, for this question, I think that's need to the discussion need to be about the specific meaning, what kind of the weapons need to be installed, what kind of the level of the protection they get, and also the third important thing is the readiness for the maintenance and the spare parts of the armored vehicles, whether it's the new one or the decommissioned one, because as you can imagine, their usage in the battlefield is times and times and times heavier than on the training basis. So for each specific types of vehicles, all the things together, including the sustainability of their usage, is of the crucial importance.
How about the training of fighter pilots?
The training of the fighter pilots, as you know, Ukraine, with our partners, launched the coalition of the fighter jets, was the top priority of working with the partners for the F-16 fighter jets. And we of course, we need the training for the pilots, both the pilots themselves, the engineering parts, logistic, navigation, with the top priority as of now, this is F-16 fighter jets.
Thank you. On the Shahed drones that you mentioned in your opening statement, these are supplied by the Iranian regime. Are in some cases, are these actually operated by the IRGC?
I cannot now comment whether they are operated by IRGC. Yes, Shahed drones itself, they are supplied by Iran. Russia also, as we know, started to produce their own version of that kind of the Shahed drones, which is called Lancet. And with the regards of Russia's ability to produce the drones, the specific attention and what we are asking our partners is to increase the sanction pressure, and especially the close any loopholes into the circumventions of the sanctions. Because what we discovered is that this kind of drones, both Shahed drones and Russian-produced drones, have many spare parts that are produced in Western countries, in NATO countries. And this is an important thing, not to allow Russia to circumvent the sanctions and to get these spare parts.
Yes, we've heard troubling reports of components in landmines that may have circumvented sanction and had been manufactured in Canada. Just on artillery shells, I understand from our travels as a committee, we visited the Canadian base in Latvia, among other stops on our trip. We heard all about the importance of artillery shells and the expenditure rates. Can you comment on has Ukraine been able to? There are reports that Ukraine has successfully narrowed the gap a bit on firing rate, but what are your needs on artillery shells, and what can Canada and other allies do to ensure that you have adequate supplies of artillery shells to be able to sustain and ultimately achieve victory in this?
Thank you. Indeed, the steady supply of the artillery shells, including 155, is of the crucial importance. And there were the first time ever this autumn, the days when Ukrainian usage of the artillery shells was higher than Russians, which was very unusual, because on the contrary, Ukraine, because of the heavy need in the artillery shells, was using much less ammunition on the battlefield that Russians were. So that's why this is crucially important to maintain the steady supply of the ammunition. And of course, we are grateful to Canada for supplying us with the ammunition, but that's the level and the needs for the ammunition. We are counting in 100,000 and million of rounds of the ammunitions. That's why you can understand, the magnitude of the need. So the ramping up production, both in Ukraine and all of the NATO countries, is crucially important to be able to sustain with the supply of the ammunition.
Kelly, Mr. Collins, 6 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And Ambassador, welcome to the committee. And our thoughts and prayers are with you and your family and everyone who's in harm's way where you are this evening. My first question is around Russia. You mentioned propaganda, Russia's propaganda efforts in your opening statement. And, of course, they continue to spread disinformation, not just in Russia, but in all parts of Ukraine. And that disinformation has now obviously been spread to different parts of the world to try to undermine support for Ukraine and its people and its war effort. It's working in some sectors, not just with the general population, but it's working with governments. And we're seeing that right now. I'm watching very closely your president's visit to the U.S. and his efforts to try to get at some of the conservative Republican members who have seemed to have bought into that misinformation and disinformation that Russia is spreading across the world. What can parliamentarians do, and what can the government of Canada do to assist in your efforts to combat that disinformation that's being spread by Putin?
Thank you. Indeed, Russian war machine is conducting numerous disinformation campaigns. Just for example, I will tell you one that we recently saw in Ukraine. There were special messaging, special through the social media address to Ukrainian soldiers just to put away the arms and go on the Russian side. So they are specifically able to target the people. Of course, like it failed, but the Russian disinformation is spreading the world, both in Ukraine to disunite people, to share the fatigue. And also we see it in many countries in our partners where they use especially the social media, they use the so-called trolls, so the numerous thousands of accounts which are spreading this disinformation and sharing this Russian narrative just to disunite people, to bring war fatigue and to try to undermine the support for Ukraine. Because I believe Russia understands that, first of all, they already failed with their so-called special operation. And the only way how Russia can somehow at least stay on the line, not to be kicked off from Ukraine, is to try to decrease the support of Ukraine. And that's why they are conducting this disinformation campaigns in all of the countries in our partners. But you need also to realize that in parallel, Russia just adopted the new budget for 2024. And they have the record high defense spendings, which increased from the previous year to 30%, and around 39% of all of the budget spendings in Russia for the next year will go to the military, defense sector, and law enforcement. Russia is putting huge amount of money, approximately over 200 billion Canadian dollars for the defense, for its defense and law enforcement. In parallel, they use this disinformation, and what we all can do is spread the message of unity. And of course, like all of the steps for the support of Ukraine, all of the statements are now very important, both for the people in Ukraine, because for them understanding that there is a strong back to Ukraine from our partners, it's important. And also to explain the people that this Ukraine is fighting not only for our territory, we are protecting the eastern flank of the NATO. And the security of Canada and all of the NATO alliance, it's on its unity and collective security. And we are now protecting one of the borders of the NATO.
I agree 100%. Ambassador, I have less than 2 minutes. Very quickly, President Zelensky was quoted recently as saying, delaying aid to Ukraine is a gift to Russia. We recently voted here. It wasn't unanimous in terms of our support here in Canada.
Point of order.
And we've seen fractures.
Standing Order 18 is quite clear. That says No member may reflect upon any vote of the House except for the person of moving that such vote be rescinded. So he cannot reflect on it. And I'd also just add to this in Chapter 20, and I have the floor, Chapter 20, page 1079, particular attention is paid to the questioning of public servants. The ambassador is a public servant of the government of Ukraine. The obligation of the witness to answer all questions put by the Queen must be balanced between the role that public servants play in providing confidential advice to their ministers or government. So I would suggest that asking the ambassador to weigh in on decisions made by this House would be out of order. It's definitely in violation of Standing Order 18 in the ask, as well as puts the ambassador in an unfortunate position of trying to deal with political discourse here rather than updating us on what's actually happening in Ukraine.
Mr. Chair, I'm well aware of the rules. We were lectured in the House this morning several times when this issue was raised. And I, of course, didn't point out the result of the vote. I said it wasn't unanimous. And so I think I was very clear. And so, Mr. Chair, if I could continue with my question.
Point of order. So I have Ms. Matheson next.
Just as a note that the ambassador is not a Canadian public servant, just for clarification.
Yes. Any other weighing in on the point of order? I'm going to allow Mr. Collins to continue his questioning. The rule certainly applies to the House. I don't know that it actually applies to the committee.
It's a standing order.
It's a standing order of the House. It's not necessarily a
applies to
standing
committee.
order of here.
Point of order, Chair.
Yes.
Point of order. I would just point out that during the discussion in the House today about this very matter, that it was Conservative member Mr. Janius who pointed out that that standing order only pertains to the House. It doesn't pertain to votes in committee. And I believe that the vote that Mr. Collins is referring to also took place in committee.
Mr. Chair, on that point of order, the reality is that in votes in the committee you can comment on in the House. You cannot take any vote in the House and apply it to committee. Committees are extension of the House. We're a creation of the House, and so the rules of the House apply here as well.
And in addition, the committee can set its own rules. So I'm my position. Challenge the chair. Okay, it's a.
It is definitely
You
in
can challenge the
violation
chair.
of the rules.
It's a dilatory motion, and so you call the vote. Clerk.
Whether the ruling of the chair is sustained.
Yeah.
You can't say a vote in the House wasn't unanimous?
No,
Function of a vote.
he moved. He made a point of order. I've ruled against him. He's challenged the chair. Therefore, it's a vote. It's a dilatory vote.
Yeah, we can't debate on it.
Yeah. So, call the vote.
Shall the decision of the chair be sustained? Mr. Collins. Mr. Fillmore.
Yes.
Mr. Fisher.
Sustain the will of the chair.
Madame Lalonde.
Oui.
Madame Lambropoulos.
Yes.
Mr. Bazan. Ms. Glant. Mr. Kelly. Ms. Kramp-Nyman.
No.
Madame Normandin.
We.
Ms.
Worked so
Matheson.
well before you
Yes.
got here.
Okay. With that, Mr. Collins, you have 1 minute and 21 seconds left for
Thanks, Mr.
questions.
Chair. And I apologize, Ambassador, on behalf of the committee that we had to go through this. Why is it so important that we are united and unanimous in our support for Ukraine as it relates to providing aid as quickly as possible?
Thank you. Indeed, we are very grateful for the support that Canada have provided for us. And as you know that just recently the NATO said that Russia is one of the biggest threats to the NATO as a security alliance. And it also means that this is a threat for all of the NATO members. And today, Ukrainians, young men and women who are fighting on the front line, they not only are brave enough to sacrifice their life to protect both our country, both our territory, but also to protect the eastern flank of the NATO. And the support is much needed because, as I mentioned to you, Russia is investing significantly in their defense sector. And it's not only about Ukraine. You probably saw Iranian delegation recently visited Russia. You saw Hamas delegation visited Russia. If we all put the dots together, we would understand that Russia and the also called acts of evil is the threat for all of us as democracies. And yes, we have the democratic discussion, the difference in policies, but when it comes to the security, when it comes to the security of the democracies which Ukraine is now fighting for, our people are today dying for that democracy will prevail.
We're going to have to leave the answer there, Mr. Collins. Madame Normandine, 6 minutes.
Excellence, c'est un plaisir de...
Excellent. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you for the time that you are giving us here today. I would like to go back to a question picking up on a point that you brought up about the defense sector, the defense industry, that you would like to see more active in Ukraine and participating to Ukraine with the help of foreign partners. I would like to hear you on whether there are foreign investors who come to help out with the defense industry in Ukraine. Would this be helpful on the media level, in the media war against Russia, but would it also help strengthen long-term the economy of Ukraine that will need help as it comes out of the war? Could you say something about this?
Thank you. Indeed, the attention that we are now paying to the development of the defense sector have several pillars. One is, of course, to have the production inside Ukraine, which means that there are more jobs. It's less expensive. And the third thing is we save the time and we save the cost for logistic, for the maintenance. The second priority why we are putting so much attention for the defense sector is also to be able to maintain, to repair all the equipment that Ukraine is getting quicker, and to save both the time and to save the efforts to have it quickly repaired. Just recently, Ukraine signed the not only the MOU but a more binding agreement with Rheinmetall. It's one of the top leading defense conglomerate defense company in the world, and to launch the joint project here. We also would welcome Canadian companies, Canadian defense sector companies, to build this capabilities together in Ukraine. Before joining the committee, I was just before that, I was meeting with our Minister of Defense, and he also reaffirmed, first he sent the best regards and thanks for many of the committee members with whom he was managed to meet during his visit with President Zelensky to Canada, and also reaffirmed that Ukraine is ready to and welcome the Canadian defense sector companies to help us to produce and maintain the equipment in Ukraine.
Merci beaucoup. J'aimerais vous...
Thank you very much. I'd also like to hear you on another topic, slightly less military, but about sanctions. You mentioned that unfortunately Russia has access to a lot of material that shouldn't be getting into Russia for its use. We also know that there is a good deal of export to Kazakhstan, for example. Should we reconsider how we're sanctioning third countries, which now are getting around and sidestepping the sanctions, and also the oil cap? Should we consider more oil capping on third countries?
Thank you. Indeed, Russia is trying to use some intermediaries, meaning the companies of its neighboring countries to circumvent the sanctions, and we see already several cases, and I would say more, and even today, U.S. government imposed sanctions, including to the companies who were engaged in circumventing the sanctions, and this control need to be strengthened. I think it's for the interest of all of us that the defense technologies are not being transferred to Russia, and Russia's ability to produce more weapons need to be decreased, not to say like diminished. So there are still the loopholes. First of all, the proper investigation need to be done on those cases that reported about the sanctions circumventions, but also the specific work with and looking on the companies who serve and as intermediaries and bringing them. Depending whether these companies are, if they are in the third countries, so they need to be also exposed to the sanctions for the specific actions supporting Russia to get those technologies not in line in all of the sanction legislation and regulation. In terms of the specific actions, I would also like to say that the important decision of Canadian government being the first to impose the restrictions of Russian produced diamonds and the jewelry products. You know that Russia is also one of the really the biggest in the world producer of diamonds, and that part of Russian exports significantly fueled Russian economy and its ability to wage the war. And third thing, if we come back to Russia's military budget for the next year, Russia still have the prognosis for the increase of the revenues in the year 2024. And one of the biggest increase for its forecast of the revenue is the additional revenue from the oil exports. So there are many of the tools how to work for that, but I think the joint efforts need to be made to decrease Russia's ability to fuel the war from oil and gas revenues that Russia has.
You have about 10 seconds, but Ms. Matheson, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ambassador. We appreciate you being with us. So a few weeks ago, New Democrats asked the Canadian government to answer questions about a Globe and Mail report that Kyrgyzstan, I can never say that, has re-exported Canadian-made electric detonators to Russia, and the Liberals have refused to answer this question. But if it's true, those Canadian-made detonators are possibly used with landmines and could be used by Russia in their war against Ukraine. So can you tell us more about that role of Kyrgyzstan in the war and why Canada needs to take the allegations extremely seriously?
We do believe that any of the allegations of the cases that's about sanctions, circumventions, need to be investigated, and that loopholes need to be closed. As to the specific reports, I have no additional information for the specific landmines, the spare parts for the landmine case, but definitely this is worth of exploring and understanding how, if that is how these spare parts were exported and whether it was done through the intermediaries, who are those intermediaries, and why they committed the illegal act.
You spoke earlier about F-16 training. Could you go into a bit more detail about what you're looking at, what's required, and how Canada plays that bigger role? I know that I have folks in my area that are really eager to provide that support.
Thank you. So Canada and 11 other countries are the members of, as we call it, the Fighter Jets Coalition, which is the coordination group of working together on helping us with the needs on building our capability in the air. Because as you see, since the February 24th, 2022, Ukraine does not have superiority in the air. So for our ground forces to quickly move further to liberate territories, as many other NATO countries would do according to military tactic, they need the support from the air. And so the transfer to Ukraine, the F-16 fighter jets will be important to secure the air superiority or the air control and air support for the ground troops. Of course, it requires the training of the pilots, which is going on. I think, I'm not available to share publicly many of the details, but as a Canadian Ministry of Defense and General Staff, as a member of this capability, as a member of Fighter Jets Coalition, there are the discussion between the between all of the members of the coalition, what could be supported. Of course, the training and many other things, including the fighter jets itself. And you know that we have the political signal from our partners that they are ready to provide us to transfer F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine as soon as our pilots and infrastructure will be ready. And we are putting a lot of efforts to make it quicker.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about post-war reconstruction and that hope looking forward in terms of what's required for that long-term support from the international community. What do you see once Ukraine wins and regains its territory? How can Canada plan to support now, can plan to support that rebuild into the future?
Thank you. Indeed, the damage to the economy is huge. Last year, Ukrainian economy shrank 30%. And the World Bank estimated the needed funds to recovery, which exceed $400 billion. And each day, as Russia launch missiles, drones, there is a damage both to the critical infrastructure, to the housing. A lot of people moved from the eastern regions closer to the front line to Kyiv and the other cities, but many of them are in the living in the temporary shelters, or the residents lost their home. We all understand that the amount of the financing that will be needed for rebuilding is huge. That's why one of the important pillar or the course of this funding is the Russian sovereign assets that are frozen in many of the Western democracies. And I would like to thank you for supporting the legislation, as Canada was the first to introduce the legislation of seizuring Russian assets, and the procedure of seizuring Russian sovereign assets could be also expedited so that they can be also as one of the ways to finance the post-war rebuilding. But also, as I'm here in Kyiv and talking with many people, including the business associations, many of the Ukrainian companies and the foreign companies who never moved from Ukraine, even during the wartime, they continue to invest in Ukraine. They continue to work there. They continue to enlarge, build new facilities, move from the eastern regions to the western regions, their facilities. So the country, and at first, Ukrainian companies are continuing to working. And in the post-war recovery, of course, we will need more technology, we will need more equipment for that rebuilding, and we would welcome.
Unfortunately, Ambassador, we're going to have to leave that answer there. Colleagues, we've got slightly less than 25 minutes, and we've got 25 minutes worth of questions. So if we're fairly crisp, I think we can do it. So, Mr. Bazan, 5 minutes. Crisp questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ambassador, thank you for appearing today, and hope that you're staying safe, knowing how dangerous things can be even in Kiev. And Pat and I have been there, and I've heard the air sirens and seen the damage that has been done in the city, never mind outside of the city. So first of all, on behalf of the Conservatives, we thank all those Ukrainian heroes who originally took to the streets of the Maidan and who then went to the front line in the Donbass and now are fighting for the very existence of Ukraine, and as you said, are protecting Canadians here at home as you deal with the Russian invasion and protecting NATO's eastern flank. Conservatives support Ukraine. We support Operation Unifier. We started Operation Unifier. We support the delivery of weapons and military kit. We started that process back in 2015. We've been calling for the government to send lethal weapons in 2018, which didn't happen until the hot war and full-scale invasion happened in 2022. We just know that there's probably more that we can do and to give, including providing more munitions, more sniper rifles, made right here in Canada, both by Colt and PWG in Winnipeg. I know they've both organizations have already supplied sniper rifles and machine guns. And we also know that we have surplus kit here that we can use. I know Ukraine is getting armored ambulances from Canada that are being built at JDLS in London, but that will be done after the Canadian armored ambulances are finished off and supplied to the Canadian Armed Forces, which means that our existing fleet of armored ambulances, which are LAVs, which are in still running condition, should be donated to Ukraine. Would you agree that would be a welcome donation to support the Canadian or the Ukrainian Armed Forces?
Thank you, Mr. Brazon, for your question. As I've already said about the armored vehicles, we definitely need both the armored vehicles with the equipment installed, so-called Medivacs. Both of them are needed on the front line. In particular case, I don't want to comment any particular company, but I would say the only thing that is parallel important, including what weapons is installed, also the ability to supply the spare parts, sustainable ability for the maintenance, because as this all equipment is heavily used, and it's not in the peacekeeping missions, that's a real front line. So to be able to quickly repair them, maintain, to change the spare parts, so that they can live longer time. That is also the important thing.
I believe that's easily.
Yes,
I believe that's easily enough done by providing enough of the ambulances that some would be the ones in poor condition to be used as the spare parts for the other ones until the new ones are built and arrive. We also have brand new Roll 3 mobile hospitals that were bought, and I think there was a dozen of them that were bought for the pandemic, but were never even taken out of the container. So they're brand new Roll 3 hospitals. Would they be helpful to ensure that those that have significant injuries and traumatic injuries are treated more quickly at the Ukrainian front line?
As of now, I can't say that this is in the top priority list. The Medivacs, which are able to quickly deliver the injured to the first line of support and then the second line support, but as far as I know, this is not in the top priority list.
Last minute, and I know there's a little bit of concern still about the battles that are going on at the Itka and down in Kherson, but also near the nuclear plant at Zaporizhzhia. Can you just give us a quick update on how things are going in securing the nuclear plant in Zaporizhzhia?
Thank you for this question. It's really important because that is another example how Russia is actually using the civil nuclear object as also as another part of their warfare. So they control Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station. There are the missions of IAEA, and in their report that they clearly stated that there is the weapons installed in the territory of the nuclear power station. There is one more thing, which is the risk that the personnel, they're working under the pressure. They're working not according to the norms and the rotation norms. The people are threatened, and it also does not, help to increase the security. So the situation is of a big risk, including their attempts and shelling around the station. There were for the last.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave the answer there. Thank you, Mr. Brazan. Mr. Fillmore, 5 minutes.
Ambassador Kovalev, it's very nice to see you again. I wish it was under better circumstances for you. The conditions you're experiencing in Kyiv right now are bringing the war into a very strong focus for us all here. So wonderful to have you, and please do us the great favor of staying safe. Ambassador, we know, and you've referenced, in fact, that the sale of Russian oil is helping to fund the Russian war machine. You and I have spoken on various occasions before, including at the Halifax International Security Forum, about Canada's readiness to provide and even export renewable energy options into Europe to to help Europe get off of Russian oil. I want to just be clear that Canada is absolutely committed to working with our European partners and the Ukraine to achieve our shared goals on energy security. So far, this has included the Canada, Germany, and Canada EU Hydrogen Alliance. It's included Bill C-49, which will modernize the Atlantic Accords to allow the development of offshore green hydrogen for export to Europe. And to Ukraine. There's also a recent deal between Canada and Romania to build new CANDU reactors, which will also shut off the need for coal and Russian oil and gas. So, Ambassador, I wonder if you could just speak to the shared priorities between Canada and Ukraine when it comes to Europe's long-term energy security.
Thank you. I think since February 21st, Europe has made a significant step forward for the energy diversification and getting rid of Russian dependency on Russian oil and gas. And of course, here, the importance of diversification of the energy flow is important. So Europe is increasing the renewable share. Ukraine also see in its rebuilding, maintaining the mixture of energy sources, but also with the development of the green energy. I would also like to say that we are already building the strong cooperation with Canada in the energy sector. Just this year, Canadian company Cameco and Ukrainian operator of all of our nuclear power stations signed a 10-year contract for supply of uranium, and Canada is helping us to build and before pre-war time, Ukraine was buying most of this nuclear fuel. Pre-war time, I mean before 2014, Ukraine was buying nuclear power fuel from Russia. Now we are buying it from the Canadian-owned company Westinghouse, and Cameco will provide uranium as a source for production of this nuclear fuel. So we really appreciate the strategic partnership which started and the contracts were signed this year. We also signed the MOU with of our hydropower operator and another Canadian infrastructure company to help us to build the hydropower facilities in Ukraine, because as a Ukrainian strategy for the rebuilding, Ukraine see itself as the energy hub for Europe, having one of the most developed energy infrastructure, both in electricity, both in oil, both in gas. We have the biggest on the European continent gas storages, which are even during the war widely used with all of the European gas traders. So Ukraine will, of course, put a lot of efforts in rebuilding the energy sector and in building the more capacity, both in gas production, renewable energy, and of course nuclear, which as of today is 50% of Ukrainian electricity production. And we see here the big opportunities for cooperation with Canadian companies.
Thank you. I look forward to our next conversation, Ambassador. I'm going to yield the remainder of my time to my colleague, Ivan Baker.
Thanks very much. That's very kind. And I'll just very briefly, Ambassador, we're all thinking about you and the Ukrainian people at this very difficult time, and especially today. Mike, you said something during your remarks about that the fact that this war, that Ukrainians are not just fighting for their own country or for their own survival to protect themselves from Russia's attacks, but they're also doing a service to the rest of the world. Can you talk about why this war is, why Ukraine's fight is a fight not only for Ukraine, but for the rest of the world as well?
Thank you. As we all remember, NATO as an alliance was created post-Second World War to build the security and foremost the collective security. And of course, like Russia is one of, as of today, is named specifically one of the biggest threats to the NATO. As Ukraine is now, and I've just in my introductory remarks just shared with you the figures of how much Russian equipment we have already destroyed, on how much Russia has losses in their manpower, but also how Russian capabilities were decreased military capabilities. It helps to strengthen security for the NATO countries. The second important point is that helps.
Sorry, Ambassador, I'm running a clock here, unfortunately. That's a very important question, and I feel you were unpacking a very important answer, but I'm going to have to cut you off, unfortunately, and I hope you can work it back into some other answer. Madame Normandin, 2.5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
2.5 minutes, Ms. Normandin. Thank you very much. Madam Ambassador, experts have explained to us that Russia seems to have accumulated a great number of missiles in preparing for a larger offensive operation against infrastructure over the winter months. I'd like to know whether a good way to support Ukraine is only by providing more anti-defense missiles and ammunition, but is there also, or whether there's also another approach that we could use to ensure the resilience of your essential infrastructure? Is there anything else we could be doing to help protect your infrastructure?
Unfortunately, I'll just give you the figure. One missile for the air defense system can cost from $500,000 to $4 million. One destroyed energy object can cost from $20 million plus. So just investing and helping us with the air defense help us to not to have the tens and hundreds of $millions of losses of the critical infrastructure, plus electronic warfare and drones. If you see, it's also one thing that also many of our partners are learning on what is the modern warfare. This war is also the war where there are a lot of drones used, and the electronic warfare and the ability to land the drones, ability to land them down and not to allow them to destroy either the position of our troops or the civilian infrastructure. It's important. So modern technology of the electronic warfare and the types of drones, different types of the drones, are also one of the important needs as the war becomes also having a very specific and technological part.
Merci. Et rapidement, on voit que...
Thank you. And quickly, we see that Russia seems to be placing its assets further and further into the territory. Will it be helpful then, into its own territory, clearly, will it be helpful to provide more long-range missiles to help Ukraine?
Long-range missiles will help us to destroy Russian logistic and Russian military capabilities and the warehouses. One of the breakthrough on the counteroffensive operation when we liberated Kherson was the usage of HIMARS and the ability for them to destroy the logistic chains. Also, it worked with some of the military base in our Ukrainian Crimea, of illegal Russian military base. So the long-range missiles is important for us.
Yeah, I apologize again for cutting you off, but I'm just trying to get through this in a timely sort of way. Ms. Masson, 2.5 minutes.
Chair, and I think I'd actually like to hear the rest of the ambassador's response to Mr. Baker's question. It was on point, and so I'd give my time for that.
Thank you. It's really important. One, as I've told you, we are protecting the eastern flank of NATO. And imagine the other situation: Russian troops on the near the Polish border. It seems like it would mean that all of the NATO countries, instead of supporting the welfare of its citizens, would need to invest more in their military to defend themselves. The second thing is the security in the Arctic region. As we are now fighting with Russia and destroying their equipment, we are decreasing the capability of Russian military capability in Arctic. And that is of significant importance for many countries which have their presence in the Arctic. So Ukraine is actually protecting also the Arctic. The third thing is the democracy itself, because none of the democratic country, none of the leader of the democratic country could ever wage the war with such high level of losses. And Russia does not care because Russia does not have any democracy. And if we will look in the future for many emerging economies and the countries who are now choosing their path, whether to become a democracy and build the strong institutions or to look on the way of Russian dictatorship. And they are closely watching what is happening in Ukraine and with the support of Ukraine. And the victory of Ukraine in this war will set for a decade the pattern for many of the developing countries, the way how they develop themselves, either with the human rights, either with the democracy, either with the international order, or they will choose the Russians pattern. And I think it's in the hands of all of us to make this right choice now. Thank you.
Ms. Kramp-Nyman, 5 minutes.
It's passed to Cheryl.
Cheryl's going to.
Oh, well, okay.
Madam Ambassador, Ukraine has been a constant target for the Russian cyber attacks, yet they remain resilient. How has Ukraine's cybersecurity adapted to Russia's cyber warfare since the war began?
Thank you. It's a very timely question because even pre-war, Ukraine faced significant cyber attacks, including the attacks on our critical infrastructure, electricity grids, banking sector, government institutions, and so on. And we managed to strengthen our digital infrastructure. And when the invasion started, there was none single day when our banking system was not working, when our government was not able to work, including the fact that Ukraine has a very well-developed digital governance, so that the people, including over 6 million of people who were left Ukraine and another 7 million of IDPs, they are getting many of their government services online with the special government application, and it's working because we are able to protect all of this critical infrastructure. Of course, we appreciate the support we are getting from our NATO partners, and we have a very close cooperation on the cybersecurity, both with the NATO countries members and NATO itself. But of course, Russia is becoming more sophisticated, and the significant cyber attack that we are facing today on our mobile operator will also stimulate us to invest more in the cybersecurity and to learn the lesson and improve it.
You have successfully hacked the Russian tax system and destroyed all the data. Has Russia been successful in responding in a meaningful way?
As I mentioned, we have today the cyber attack. None of the data of the customers have reported to be damaged or that there was an excess. So now the connection is steadily being restored. And so there is no major kind of losses except for a few hours without connection. It does not have any
Ambassador,
damage or harm.
I was talking about the Ukrainian attack on the Russian banks and the destruction of their data.
I'm not ready to comment on it, and I don't have any specific information I can comment today. Frankly, one of the things, because there was lack of connection and internet in Kyiv, was over 10 hours today.
And so congratulations on the success that your side is having on that front. So do you find it concerning that our government is planning to cut our military spending by $1.4 billion into next year, and that will impact how our contributions are contributing to actually Ukraine?
Thank you, but I'm not in position to comment on the decision of the government, of Canadian government.
And Opry Assurance in Latvia is very important, as you said, that Ukraine is on the eastern flank of NATO. How important is it that Canada continue to augment its presence in Latvia?
I think I would have more comments when, not if, but when Ukraine will become a NATO member, and Ukraine would also be able to support was one of the strongest military on the European continent to the NATO security. And I would also say that what I can say for us, it's crucially important to maintain this military support and maintain the training program, which was launched back in 2015, the Unifier program, which have already trained over 37,000 of Ukrainian troops. That's of course is very important for us, and we appreciate this continued support.
With your cyber resilience, is there anything that you can share with Canada so that we can augment our current capabilities?
Yes, and I think there is already the cooperation is the NATO Center Cybersecurity Unit, where we are not only getting help, but also sharing the experience, which is very important because the cybersecurity attacks, they are not the same, they don't have the same pattern. And of course, for us, sharing and, increasing our own awareness altogether as the partners is crucially important. And also when it comes to the digital governance, where Ukraine was among the first countries to introduce digital passport and so on, we are building the partnership between one of the Canadian province of Quebec, and our Ministry of Digital Infrastructure.
And again, I'm keep apologizing for interrupting, but I have to. Final 5 minutes goes to Madame Lambropoulos.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ambassador, for being here with us during these difficult times to answer some of our questions. I'd like to know, from your perspective, what impact Operation Unifier has had on the Ukrainian people and on the armed forces of Ukraine, whether we're talking about supporting the training of Ukrainian recruits, whether we're talking about combat engineers assisting in the training of Ukrainian sappers. Can you talk about what this support means to the people of Ukraine?
Thank you. There are, I would say, two stages of the program Unifier. One was before the full-scale invasion, where was 30,000 of Ukrainian troops have been trained, and all of them, when the war started, they were ready. They have been trained, and that helped. That was one of the important milestones helping our resistance within the very first day of Russian full-scale invasion. Then the joint training happening now in many countries. Unifier is a part of the bigger training program which is happening. The core base is UK Interflex program, but also there are many of the specific trainings, including the engineers, the sappers, the training which covers the usage of the new equipment. And it is important because both the training, the newly conscript soldiers, we have the totally different strategy as Russians doing. First, we train the people, equipment with everything needed, and then they go to the front line. And that is important because it helps. And I think what's also important that during this program, there is a sharing knowledge and sharing experience so that Ukrainian soldiers are also sharing their knowledge from the real battlefield, from the real military strategy, what is happening and how it works during the real war with their Canadian colleagues. And the feedback what I've got from many of those who were as a part of the Unifier program, that this feedback is very important because it helps to exchange the knowledges, and definitely it will increase the readiness of the commanders in both our countries.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing some of those examples as well, because it makes it more concrete for us. And if you could choose one way in which Canada has had an impact, the most important or the most effective contribution Canada has made during this time, what would you say that it is? And if it's Operation Unifier, then is there something else that is equally important?
Thank you. It's very hard because, frankly, we are grateful for all of the strong support Canada is providing to Ukraine, whether it's the financial help, over $5 billion of the loans that Canadian government provided to us, whether the military, the diplomatic, the support with the sanctions. It's all important because this is the fighting the war. It's not only on the battlefield. We have the battle on the diplomatic field. We have the battle with Russian propaganda trying to undermine support and disunite people. We have the economic fight because we need to help people, those who suffered from the war, internally displaced. And so it's very hard, and I would say that Ukraine is grateful for that support to Canada, and most important to Canadian people, because the way how Canadian people helped Ukrainians fleeing the war, opening their houses, opening their hearts, that's really very important, and we're really grateful to all the people.
Thank you very much.
Madame Lavropoulos and Ambassador, thank you for all your efforts to join us today. I express, I think on behalf of the committee, but others have expressed it as well, that we wish you safety and Godspeed. And we look forward to seeing you back here doing your work. You represent your nation well. We thank you for it. And with that, I think we'll suspend. Thank you again. with us today Mr. Howard Schatz from the RAND Corporation, coming in by video conference. Thank you, sir. We have Ukrainian Canadian Congress. We have Eor Mikolashin, who is the executive director and is not feeling terribly well, so he is home. And Oris Zakdalansky, senior policy advisor, who is here, whom I'm assuming is going to make the 5-minute presentation. And we also have somewhere in the building, Mr. Perry. Colleagues will note that Mr. Perry was originally not scheduled. Oh, there he is, Mr. Perry with his Christmas tie on. Socks too. Well, we'll check that out. I just wanted to thank Mr. Perry for filling in the last second. Up until about half an hour prior to the meeting, maybe 15 minutes, it was not at all sure that we were going to be able to get the ambassador. And fortunately, she was able to make a connection, and we were able to put in a full hour. So I want to thank Mr. Perry for potentially bailing us out. But again, thank you, all of you. I'm going to start with Mr. Schatz. Sir, if you could open with a 5-minute statement, that would be helpful, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I thank the members of the Standing Committee on National Defense for inviting me to participate. My comments stem from work recently completed with colleagues at the RAND Corporation. And when we started this work on Ukrainian reconstruction, my senior colleague, Ambassador James Dobbins, who had worked in a variety of crisis situations, noticed 2 elements were missing from other analysis. One of those was that the relevant comparison cases for Ukraine reconstruction are those of European reconstruction throughout the 20th century and the 21st century. There was too much discussion of Iraq and Afghanistan. The second issue was that discussion of security was missing. And without security, reconstruction will not succeed. They go hand in hand. I'll focus my 5 minutes on reconstruction. I welcome discussion of security cooperation and security issues in the Q&A. We looked at a variety of reconstruction events, including natural disasters and Japan after World War II, but we focused on Western Europe after World War II, Eastern and Central Europe after the Cold War, and the Western Balkan Six after the violent breakup of Yugoslavia. There were a number of useful lessons from these cases for Ukraine. We found that in all cases, successful reconstruction efforts have involved strong linkages for international trade and international investment, so links to the international economy. They also involved reforms to the domestic business environment to attract investment. This issue relates to financing. Aid is going to be important. Aid encourages other sources of finance, and it often can cover the highest risk aspects of reconstruction. Grants or equity injections are far preferred to loans. But historically, aid has provided only a small portion of total funding. Private investment that Ukraine mobilizes from new and existing foreign investors, residents, and even or especially the Ukrainian diaspora will be essential to successful reconstruction. Russian assets, both international reserves and private assets frozen in the West, could be an important source of funding. There is a robust debate about that in numerous jurisdictions, but legal authorities for using them are not on firm ground so far, and there could be consequences for the international financial system. This doesn't mean they shouldn't be used, but care needs to be taken on how they are used and how they are seized. The amount of aid provided is only one issue. Donor coordination will be a challenge. It could burden Ukraine and slow reconstruction. Donors should adopt a structure building off the multi-donor coordination platform that controls donor freelancing. Given the enormity of the task, each major donor should have a full-time empowered senior coordinator, as well as a senior representative on the ground in daily contact with the Ukrainian government. Periodic donor conferences will not be sufficient. Finally, in the area of reconstruction, Ukraine's task is as much about reform as it is reconstruction. This is Ukraine's opportunity to reverse 30 years of unsatisfactory economic and political development. In other cases, reforms were in part driven by donor conditionalities. This will be true here. Conditionalities may include punishments and rewards. The attraction of EU membership should be the prime but not the only driver of these essential conditionalities. This effort will take years, if not decades. Waste, fraud, abuse, corruption could erode Western support. Ukraine should have, and donors should insist on, a strong inspector general and effective monitoring and evaluation with data sharing with donors. Ukraine also is very technologically advanced. Ukraine has the capability, and Canada, the US, and other donors should encourage the adoption of end-to-end real-time monitoring of flows of assistance to the extent possible. An inspector general provides after-the-fact analysis, real-time monitoring is possible, and better ensures that the money is used properly. The only thing I'll say about security now is that durable security arrangements supported by the West will help Ukraine deter and defend against future Russian attacks. But they'll do more than that. Historically, we've seen that such arrangements give investors the confidence to take risks and make long-term commitments. Let me move to policy recommendations. First, Ukraine's supporters, in this case led by the United States, will need to define arrangements for Ukrainian security and credible deterrence. Allies of the United States and Canada can and should play a role in this. Specific reconstruction needs have yet to be determined, but countries can organize for reconstruction, such as passing enabling legislation, appointing a senior coordinator. The effort to explain and build support for longer-term policy needs to be carried out jointly across the political spectrum. We often focus on the Marshall Plan when looking at previous reconstruction cases. The Marshall Plan was not guaranteed to pass Congress. It passed because of a very aggressive bilateral effort in the United States. Such an effort will be needed now. Steps are needed to maintain the Ukrainian economy, set the stage for a longer-term recovery. Prime among these steps are keeping export pathways open. Partnerships with Ukraine's defense industries may be valuable for NATO and for the Ukrainian economy. There are still significant corporate governance issues to be settled.
Mr. Shantz, can I get you to wind up, please? Thank you.
Absolutely. There are certain steps that can be taken to prepare for the Berlin Recovery Conference, and I can talk about those in discussion. I will leave with the following thought. Ukraine is an advanced, sophisticated country. It should take the lead on setting reconstruction priorities. In this, leadership, marshaling money can be played, leadership of the effort, organization can be played by the G7, but the priorities should come from Ukraine. Thanks for the opportunity. I look forward to questions, and I'll close here.
Sir, Ukrainian Congress, Mr. Sakaldalski.
Ihor is going to open, I think.
Sorry, Ihor is going to open. Okay.
I still have my voice left a little bit.
Okay.
Ready to go?
Go ahead.
So thank you for the invitation, and again, apologies for not being there today. The last time that Otis and I were there was in April, some 8 months ago. At that time, we had just finished marking the first anniversary of Russia's full-scale genocidal war against Ukraine. Now, today, we are appearing as the second year of war is ending and will soon be beginning our third. As the winter approaches, Ukrainian cities and towns are once again facing sustained Russian rocket, missile, and air attacks. As we heard from the ambassador, the goal is to knock out Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, power stations, electricity, to freeze and starve Ukrainian people. Unable to conquer Ukraine, Russia will keep trying to make Ukraine unlivable. In what will be another difficult winter for the Ukrainian people, it's alarming to see reductions in aid to Ukraine. For example, the Kiel Institute for World Economy reported last week that the global dynamics of support to Ukraine have been slowing. Newly committed aid has reached a new low between August to October 2023. This is the lowest level of aid since January 2022, before Russia launched a full-scale invasion. Of course, I'm sure we're all watching the dramatic developments taking place in Washington, south of the border today, as President Zelensky visits with President Biden and the Congress at a time of increased volatility and key questions in the future of American commitment to aiding Ukraine's defense. As the First Lady of Ukraine said just a few days ago, Olena Zelenska, we really need the help. We cannot tire of the situation, because if we do, we die. Our message to this committee and to all Canadians is do not get tired. We must all guard against the normalization of Russia's war and the normalization of the daily horrors and atrocities that Russia inflicts upon Ukraine and its people. Your colleagues at the Foreign Affairs Committee recently heard from children rescued from Russian captivity by Ukrainian non-governmental organizations. These stories are excruciating and their experience is harrowing. But the experience of Ukrainian children tells us that there must be more done to increase aid to Ukraine. So this will not be happening through negotiations or peace. The result would be murder of more Ukrainians and further destruction of Ukraine. I turn it over to my colleague to complete our remarks.
Although support for Ukraine and Ukraine's defense remains robust among Canadians, there are warning signs. There is a small but vocal minority here in Canada who want Russia to win. Now, this is unfortunate, but it is the reality. And in order to fight against it, we must all make the case more forcefully that the least costly way to defend our own country is to provide Ukraine with the weapons and economic aid that they need to win. In April, when we were last here, we appeared alongside Ambassador Kerry Buck, who stated at the time, "We are not keeping up our end of the NATO defense spending bargain. We need to do more." This remains true today. The global supply chain of weaponry that's accessible to democratic nations is woefully low, and we must produce more in Canada and provide manufacturers with long-term commitments for them to do so. And remember that Ukraine will need to defend itself even after it wins the war. We must also encourage our NATO allies to do the same. And we must help the Ukrainians through partnership and joint ventures to produce their own weapons. We need to do more to deliver the equipment the Ukrainians desperately need, and we need to do it more quickly. We echo President Zelensky's words from yesterday: Ukraine will fight, Ukraine will stand. I'm confident that freedom will always prevail when challenged. In April, we made three main policy recommendations that we asked this committee to support. These were: first, substantially increase the delivery of heavy weapons to Ukraine; second, work with allies to increase the provision of fighter aircraft to Ukraine; and three, contract with the defense industry to substantially increase production and procurement of armaments and materiel. And these recommendations remain our key asks of this committee today. Thank you.
Mr. Perry, final 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, for the opportunity to appear today. I'm going to build on some of the comments my colleague here just made and focus on the respective ability of the two sides of this war to get the material equipment they need to keep prosecuting the conflict. As we've seen, and the committee has heard, the Russians have taken very significant losses, both in personnel but also in terms of equipment. But I think, unfortunately, it's becoming increasingly clear that they've been able to compensate for this quite effectively for a few different reasons. One, we underestimated, I think, the Russians' abilities to pull significant quantities of material out of their stockpiles to a significant degree, something that I think we should potentially reflect upon if this type of conflict is likely in the future. The way that we've approached stocking and having very minimal stockpiles, I think, needs to change. But more broadly, despite the very broad and extensive set of sanctions that the Russians had imposed upon them, they've been able to further acquire material through two means. One, donations from friendly countries, which again, I think we underestimated their ability to absorb and be supplied with. And secondly, their ability to ramp up their productive capacity despite an extensive sanctions regime. This has, I think, led to a situation where in a couple of key supplies, the Russians' ability at the moment is potentially outstripping what the West is able to help supply Ukraine with. That would relate to some types of ammunition, including artillery ammunition, some types of drones, and electronic warfare systems. All this would place a premium on the West's ability collectively to continue supplying Ukraine, and on the onus on Canada, given some of the challenges amongst other Western members of that coalition, to increase their own supply to the furthest extent that we can. I was happy to read some of the recent comments that were made to the committee that there seems to have been some progress made on this in Canada, although the details of this remain a little bit unclear, at least to me, in terms of our additional support moving forward on programs of donations of armored vehicles and ammunition. But in particular, since this is both still opaque and will likely be an important issue to continue evolving and furthering Canada's ability to contribute. I'd encourage the committee to keep up its inquiry on this subject matter and potentially consider looking at 3 different avenues to consider, specifically when it comes to Canada's ability to continue making material contributions to Ukraine. First, it's not clear to me, at least, what material, if any, at all, has been replaced that Canada donated out of our own military stocks. I think that that's worth examining, and for no other reason than I'm sure at this point it's starting to impinge on some of the considerations the Canadian military would be willing to take when it comes to further donating from their own stockpiles, having not been replaced with the donations to date. Second, in September, the government announced a commitment of multi-year funding for our material assistance to Ukraine, which is a step in the right direction, but it's not yet clear that there's any short or medium-term plan for executing that in a way that would help align industry capacity with government intent. And third, and related to the second, I think it would be useful to better understand how it is that we're only at the point now, 22 months, give or take, into this war, where we are just at the point where we are making more meaningful donations of equipment and ramping up some of our own productive capacity on items like ammunition, which it has been clear for some time that Ukraine has needed since roughly February of 2022. And with that, I'll thank you and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Colleagues, I have a hard stop at 5:46, so I'm going to start the first round at 4 minutes instead of 6, and then we'll see whether we can get to that'll yield for a second round. So with that, Mr. Kelly, 4 minutes.
Thank you, and I'm going to ask Mr. Perry to continue on that vein on talking about the replenishment of supplies, specifically the artillery shells. We've had quite a bit of testimony at this committee about artillery shell production, and we've had an announcement from the government about ordering more. We've had talk of being able to go from 3,000 a month to 5,000. 5,000 shells a month is not as many as it sounds like. It's about less than a week's of firing supply to the Ukrainian forces, and it's not going to get Canada caught up to having the level of stockpile that we need. How do we get, can you tell the committee how to make this happen, to ramp up production to what would be acceptable war footing given the acute need of both Canadian forces and our ability to support Ukraine?
Thank you. So I think it seems to me like there's been a lack of urgency and focus on this issue. Notwithstanding the technical expertise involved in this, in the scheme of things, artillery shells are not complicated compared to air defense systems and many of the other pieces of equipment that Ukraine needs. They've been around for some period of time. So if we're having difficulty struggling to ramp up production in this, I have serious concerns about our ability to scale up on anything that's more complicated, which would be virtually the entire range of other war-related material. The other piece to this is that we have a standing offer and supply arrangement of long-standing with Canadian companies that produce this material. So not only is it relatively simple in the scheme of things, but we have long-standing commercial relationships, which we should be able to relatively quickly have activated, but we have been struggling to do so up until, I guess, about last week with the mentions that you had before committee. So I think the third thing we should look for is we're looking forward. I don't think that there's any likelihood that the demand from Ukraine specifically is going to attenuate for this material. And I think the conflict's shown us quite clearly that Canada needs to have on our own stock significantly more of this, as well as a significantly enhanced ability to ramp up production if this is likely to be the type of conflict we see in the future.
Thank you. Mr. Schatz, did you want to comment as well on shell production and how to untie the knots between procurement and industry to actually ramp up production to meaningful levels that could replenish supply and supply Ukraine in significant numbers that can allow Ukraine to meet objectives?
Briefly, there may be opportunities for cooperation among allied defense industries. It would be worth looking at whether there are bottlenecks of inputs. And I think Mr. Kelly's remark about preparing for the future is very important too. Here at RAND, we joke, that every sentence, every statement about security should end with buy more munitions. They're going to be important. So I would investigate Defense Industrial Base and whether there are any additional legal authorities akin to, for example, the U.S. Defense Production Act that would help do that.
We have Canada's delivered 20,000 rounds, 155 rounds from our own stock, and that's just a matter of a few days' supply. Do you think that, and we've heard though at this committee that industry says we're waiting for orders, procurement officials have spoken and been frustrated by industry's lack of capacity. Is it merely a matter of will to solve these problems on production? A signal from government of willingness to get production up to where it needs to be?
Very briefly, please. You direct that to Mr. Shantz?
Yes.
I'm afraid that would be beyond my knowledge of Canadian industry.
Yes, I think it is a question of will and urgency. It's not rocket science, it's artillery science.
We know it's not rocket science. Mr. Fisher, 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all our witnesses for being here. David, thanks for filling in last minute. We've seen you a lot at this committee. It's always great to have you and your matching tie and socks combination here. Merry early Christmas. Ihor, nice to see you. I'm going to direct my first question to you and then ask the rest of the panelists if they wish to comment. So far, Canada has provided over $2.4 billion in aid for Ukraine since the war started in February 2022. Of course, a lot of funding there for Operation Unifier, for ammunition, for tanks, and some of the equipment that we talk about in this committee all the time, and the things that the Ukrainian army have told us very clearly that they need urgently. I'm sure we're all aware of the 30-hour voting session that we had last week, where we were fortunate enough to pass a vote for $500 million in that support for Ukraine, which, again, included money for Operation Unifier to train the Ukrainian soldiers, supply the army with the tools and the equipment that they need to win this war, and they have to win this war. And we heard the last hour from the ambassador very clearly the support for your training, the support for Unifier is so important. I would ask you, Ihor, if you want to start, to talk about the importance of this funding and the need to continue to support Ukraine at this absolutely critical juncture.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Certainly, I mean, as we hear that we're entering the second winter of a trench warfare situation, that brave men and women of Ukrainian armed forces are literally, freezing in the trenches in what is one of the most heavily landmined countries in the world. I think top 5 now, this is all part of what Ukraine needs to win, which is the combination of financial, of military support, of equipment, of training, and what we're really seeing and hearing from the Ukrainians, frankly, is that they are not receiving things from all the allies as quickly as they need them. Even if an announcement is made, it takes months to implement. We've heard, they have to translate manuals. They have to learn how to repair things. They have to train on these things. So, with the Leopard tanks, particularly, that was a great Leopard tank coalition. Takes months and months to implement, and the same thing with the fighter jets as well. So, the combination of all the aid that Canada can muster with our allies is critical, because I think, I don't like saying the word, Ukraine cannot lose, but if Ukraine loses this war, it is almost an unimaginable scenario for global security for us as Canadians. So I think that is a dire reason that we need to keep supporting Ukraine.
Thank you very much for that. David, I don't know if you want to comment on that, or even if you've got the ability to talk about maybe how Ukraine has put some of Canada's contributions to use, specifically speaking to training.
Sure. So I think the Ukraine's done a commendable job. I think we've seen in the last 6 months there's been a bit of a mismatch between a desire to see some Western concepts and some fairly complex ways of employing combined arms military equipment, sort of a Western mold that I don't know were really well suited to the composition of the Ukrainian armed forces, which is now a mobilization army, whereas in the West we've built our concept for employing military force on a fully professional, in most cases, armed forces. And I think there's a mismatch between training lead times, notwithstanding the aptitude and the skill of Ukrainian soldiers, which have been problematic. And I hope going forward, collectively, the West is more nuanced about meeting the Ukrainian forces where they are in terms of what can be practically implemented in short order and for the types of equipment that they're asking for that fit their way of conducting operations.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Madame Normandine, 4 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. My first question is for Mr. Schatz on the matter of assistance to Ukraine. I understand that very recently we reversed a promise made in Europe to cover interest on, or to use the interest on frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine. Is that a bad sign about overall assistance to Ukraine? Or are there reasons for this that we should learn more about?
So there's a reluctance to use anything from sovereign assets because legal authorities are not clear. There are some very strong arguments that say that these assets can be used, and ultimately this is going to come down to either new legislation in different jurisdictions or some kind of court procedure or some other procedure that will make all asset holders comfortable with using sovereign assets. This is a big step for them to do. In terms of assistance to Ukraine, I think the bigger concern from Europe is the slowdown of the 50 to 60 billion euros that they promised. They're having big discussions about their budget. They had budgeted, I think, 55 billion or so over 4 years in grants and loans. That's stalled right now. So we should be concerned about that. We should be concerned about what's happening in the United States. What's happening in the United States should be resolved soon, one way or the other. I would like to make a point as well about assistance from the last question, and that is, I had said that aid will recede in importance. Right now, aid for something as simple as budget support is extremely important for Ukraine. They need money for payroll. They need money to repair infrastructure that is going to get bombed by missiles. So the immediate need is budget support. And there are concerns, but some of them should be resolved. It might take some time.
Merci. J'aimerais faire du pouce sur quelque chose que vous avez mentionné.
Thank you. I'd like to pick up on something you mentioned about coordinating the various donors to avoid any freelancing on their part, having donors dictating to Ukraine the projects that Ukraine should consider. Should a balance be established between that and the fact that donors do want to know where their money is going in order to feel closer to the projects on the ground? What's the right balance to strike here?
It's not easy, and that's a great question. It is very possible and very likely that without real coordination, donors are going to have all kinds of requirements generated by their parliaments, generated by their aid agencies. And, we talk about the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan was one country to many. This is many countries to one. Ukraine will not be able to fulfill all the requirements of all 30 members of the OECD Development Assistance Committee, which is why we say that ultimately the priorities should be set by Ukraine. Now, there should certainly be traceability. Countries will not carte blanche give Ukraine the right to use any assistance as they wish. This, we recognize, this Ukraine should recognize. And that's where Inspector General comes in. That's where donor meetings among senior coordinators come in, where compromises can be made in a room with Ukrainian officials. And that's also where tracing the finances come in. So we haven't really had a situation like this before. We're gonna have to stumble our way through. But in the end, there should be significant deference to Ukraine's priorities. especially if they draw on recent advances that they made in the past 10 years on decentralization, especially if we hear voices about priorities from localities from the different regions of Ukraine in terms of what would help them redevelop and reconstruct the best.
Madame Normandine. Ms. Matheson, 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses for appearing today. Ihor and Orest, I think I'd like to ask, of course, and build off of what Mr. Fisher was talking about in terms of what we saw last week in the House of Commons, and the response from your organization publicly to those votes. I know that the UCC was extremely disappointed. I just wanted to hear from you what your members, what Canadian Ukrainians are feeling right now. As you had mentioned, this is going into the second winter. Feelings about Canada's support and what happened last week.
As you can imagine, the length of this war is one that's extremely difficult for our community, many of whom have family, friends in Ukraine, and there are now some 200,000 Ukrainians who have been welcomed to Canada as refugees. And one of the main priorities of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress is to keep Canada unified in support for Ukraine, and we will continue to do everything we can in order to ensure that unity and that consensus in Canadian society.
Was there an overall belief, however, still that the Canadian government overall still is in support? And is that the message that's coming out of Ukrainian Canadian Congress as well, or?
Look, the Canadian government, everyone involved, I think, is in support of Ukraine, and we would like to see more being done on both the military, economic, and humanitarian fronts to support Ukraine, especially at a time when some of the support from other countries is, if not under question, then certainly becoming more and more difficult to predictably sustain, as we're seeing right now in the United States.
One of the things that concerns us a few weeks ago, and I'd asked the ambassador this question as well, but the Canadian government didn't really answer. There was a report in the Globe and Mail about Kyrgyzstan re-exporting Canadian-made electric detonators to Russia. These detonators that are potentially being used with landmines. Again, we didn't receive answers from the government, but they could be used by Russia against Ukraine. Can you comment on the seriousness of Canada's arms export control system, and if it's not working as intended, or what your perception is of that?
When we were asked for comment on those reports, I mean, we are. If these reports are true, they're deeply concerning, and we've written to both the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of Public Safety in order to see what the situation is and whether those reports are accurate. And I think we have not yet received a response from the government.
Okay.
The only thing I will add is, one of the things that we keep talking to the Canadian government about is the need to ensure that not only are sanctions implemented, but that they're also enforced. Sanctions implemented but not enforced are not really sanctions. So.
Thank you, Ms. Matheson. 25 minutes worth of questions and 15 minutes. So 3 minutes and 1-3-3-1-1-3-3. Mr. Bazan, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank our witnesses for appearing today. Just looking at the fall economic update and the estimates, and it talks about military assistance in the world for this year, $816 million, less $55 million in in-kind contributions. Next year, down to $318 million, and 2025-2026, it says $197 million. Anyone here concerned that there is lack of support going forward for Ukraine based upon the economic update? Mr. Perry?
So I'd say a couple things. I think we're seeing the importance now of multi-year funding, multi-year commitments, and sustainable, predictable support with that. I think we're also seeing the consequences of not having that in the past in terms of investing over multiple years, decades, multiple governments in our own armed forces, which has directly impacted what they've been able to donate directly, and the impact of having, I think, far too lean a structure with very limited ability to donate. And also concerned that what was in the fall economic statements about additional budget cuts. Don't have details yet about the impact to national defense, but I don't think it's at all inconceivable that that could potentially impact some of the programs like the munitions supply program, as well as the maintenance of existing military equipment, which might have an impact down the road on our ability to make donations to Ukraine in the future.
Your experience and expertise on Canadian Armed Forces, one of the things Ukraine was calling for last week is now to also include the provisions of F-18 fighter jets. Of course, we have a fleet of CF-18s that are going to be replaced with F-35s. That took 10 extra years to actually make that decision, unfortunately. What would be the time frame you think that our surplus CF-18s might be available to donate to Ukraine when we get our F-35s?
I'm not clear on that because that remains a little bit murky. I don't know how serviceable a state the ones that we aren't currently operating are, or to what standard the Ukrainians would want them. We certainly have expertise that, but I think
18 F-18s from the Australians that were retrofitted, and supposedly they're in good flying condition, you would think.
some quantity of them are in the process of being further upgraded, was my understanding. So I don't know exactly how many are actual flyable and able to donate. We've seen some concerning reporting, too, about how many technicians and pilots are available to operate and service the ones that we already have right now. So I don't really have a full detail.
When we're looking at donations to Ukraine of howitzers and Leopard tanks, have you heard of any plans to replace those howitzers and Leopard tanks, or any plans to even buy new tanks to replace our aging fleet of Leopards?
No.
Mr. Baker, 3 minutes.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here. I'd like to direct my question to Mr. Michalczyk. I was going to ask about something else, but today, and that was a comment was made that upset me, and I want to know if he has a reaction to it. The leader of the opposition spoke about, referred to Ukraine as a faraway foreign land, and we heard those comments in the lead up to World War II from other leaders. I'm wondering if he has any comments on that.
No, I wasn't able to hear a question period today, but I mean, Ukraine has been described as a close neighbor. I think the easternmost province in Canada is an oblast of Ukraine. I think our people-to-people ties are incredibly close, as committee members around that table know. So I think that that's a mischaracterization of the relationship in terms of the people and the history of our cultural, economic, and now military cooperation. Certainly, we've seen the Canadian public, very supportive, both of the refugees, as Oda said, the 200,000 plus, I think now, displaced persons or refugees, as we call them colloquially, and then the public support for increased humanitarian and military assistance continues to be strong. So our job is to maintain that consensus with the public, with the Parliament, and to keep working forward.
Thanks very much for that. What I wanted to ask you about, the comment was made that, so first of all, I mean, I just want to highlight the funding for from the government of Canada for Operation Unifier, for military aid for Ukraine in various forms continues to increase. I do want to get that on the record. But I also want to ask, a comment was made by Mr. Zakadalski at the beginning about that there are people in Canada, if I heard you correctly, who don't support Ukraine, who don't want Ukraine to win. We've seen a lot of Russia really in a dedicated way over the past number of years using misinformation campaigns to influence people's perceptions around the world. We've seen it in the United States. We've seen it, I believe, here. And I'm wondering if our representative from the RAND Corporation wanted to comment on the impact, what we are seeing in terms of the weakening of support for Ukraine in some small but vocal circles. Is this the result of or consequence of those misinformation campaigns by Russia?
Good question, Mr. Baker, but you've given the gentleman 4 seconds to answer it. So
my apologies for that. Could you perhaps provide us an answer in writing with that? Yeah.
I have colleagues who are looking at this. I will reach out to them and we will get you an answer to this. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. 1 minute, Madame Normandin.
Merci beaucoup. Peut-être une question pour M.
Thank you very much. A question for Mr. Perry on munitions production, because we know it's so essential. Now, we've heard the argument that it's not necessary for the government to support the production of ammunition because the sector itself should see that it's a long-term market with the ongoing war. So why is that not sufficient?
It's an entirely government-influenced and controlled market, either to supply to our own government or to export to another one. So without a surety, it's not like producing any type of product that is not controlled by an export control regime or purchased directly by the Department of Defense. So it requires government support. If it was your own capital, you'd be putting it at risk by investing it without an assurance of a government contract or pre-approval for an export permit.
Madame Matheson, 1 minute, please.
In terms of that production, ultimately a defense update would certainly be of use and helpful. Have you heard anything that's coming forward on that?
I heard it was going to be swift in April of 2022, and it's December of 2023.
Agreed. I would just like to, with my final seconds, give a verbal notice of motion. And we'll send it out appropriately as well, but that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, and that given the Conservative Caucus vote against Operation Unifier and other aid to Ukraine, that the committee undertake a study of the impact of Conservatives' votes to undermine Canada's support of Ukraine and the message this sends to the Ukrainian Canadian community. And with that, I'll end my time.
You will. I think... I don't think that was within the parameters of this study, so it does require 48 hours. Yeah. So I'm going to wait for it to be tabled properly. So with that, I have Ms. Gallant. Oh, are you?
Just a question to the clerk. Do the standing orders apply to committees?
They apply generally.
I would suggest that motion is out of order since it reflects on a vote taken in the House.
Like on how persons have taken the vote. Anyways, I've already ruled on this, and I have Ms. Gallant for 3 minutes.
Ships are also trying to circumvent the sanctions by turning off their ships' transponders, and they're known as ghost ships. They also know how to manipulate their ship's location, particularly to naval ships enforcing sanctions. How should Canada, with our allies, combat this threat?
I think that we should try and do as much as we can to strengthen the regime of sanctions, to interdict illegal material. But I think more broadly, I think we need to recognize that that's ultimately going to be imperfect. And because of that, I think we need to spend at least as much time focusing on our own domestic production as worrying about what we can or can't do to limit what the Russians can do, because I think if I were Russian right now, I'd be pretty happy with what they've been able to produce, but also equally, if not more, pleased with how limited our own collective ability in the West has been to ramp up what we can do in response.
So Ukraine's grain is vital to feeding the world, but most of that grain has to pass through the hostile waters in the Black Sea. And with the breakdown of the grain deal last summer, security situation in the Black Sea has been dire. What should Canada do more with or what can we do more with our allies to monitor the deteriorating situation in the Black Sea? And that's for Dr. Perry.
I'm not sure if there's anything specifically more that we can do. I know we've been providing some surveillance information, but I don't know that that's the most useful role that we could play.
Okay, so Canada currently has troops in Latvia as part of Operation Reassurance. That's our contribution to NATO's eastern flank. NATO is also concerned about security in the Baltic Sea, given the Russians have territory sandwiched between its enclave in Kaliningrad, and with the threat of Russian submarines. What should Canada's Navy do more with our allies to counter this threat?
I don't know that there's a lot that we can do, because I think, as we've seen recently, some reporting that our Navy's ability to deploy operationally is becoming degraded due to the advanced age of our naval frigates, as well as limitations on sailors to actually go to sea. I think we're stretched to having to make unfortunate choices between making contributions to NATO and having to, while simultaneously trying to deliver on the commitments we made as part of our Indo-Pacific strategy. So it's not clear to me that there's any more that we could do without sacrificing elsewhere.
How long would it take to get a fleet of submarines, say our first submarine, from right now, if they decided to tender an order, how long would it take?
It would depend a whole lot on how we went about doing that, but I have a huge concern that longer than the current submarines will last.
So should we then be thinking about and planning our next submarine purchase once we have our next purchase, which it needs to be now, on the books?
I think ideally we would have been planning that 5 or 10 years ago, but now is better than later. Yes.
Ms. Gallant, final questions, Ms. Lalonde.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I know I have only a few minutes, so bear with me. Last week we saw from the leader of the opposition somewhat of a tantrum, that's how I would call it as a mom, where we had to vote for 30 hours in the House, which I was very pleased to be here in the House of Commons. And certainly, there was a certain aspect where most Canadians, usually as we go to supplementary estimates, we know what's important or not. But during this period of marathon, there was aspect where I would like to hear if you think that what we've been proposing as a government is important for Ukraine. So I'm going to ask you, part of this supplementary estimate was a $500 million for funding for military aid to Ukraine. Would you say this is relevant and significant in importance to continue supporting Ukraine from the Canadian government? Yes or no? Yeah, all of you.
I do, but I would say that I spent more time reading the estimates than I did following the votes, and I recognize that the structure of the parliamentary system means that a lot of times specific issues get lumped in with wider voting issues, not individually.
Perfect. All right.
Sorry, the question is continuing to fund Ukraine, aid to Ukraine important? The answer is yes.
Thank you. Other individuals on the line? Video conference?
Mr. Schatz is an American and probably not in any position to comment
Sorry
on
about that.
Canadian.
Okay, I'm going to ask our Canadian friends, and I'll continue. There was another aspect of it which I think since 2015 we've been supporting, and I hear only good things about Operation Unifier. There was a funding to reinforce Canada's support for Ukraine, and that meant $58.4 million.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Just for the record, in 2015, on the estimates that came forward, the Liberals voted against Operation Unifier. According to you.
Again, Order. 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 You may continue, Ms. Luan.
Thank you very much. It's interesting to see the double standard in this committee, but I'm going to ask again, funding to reinforce Canada's support for Ukraine regarding humidifier. Over 38,000 Ukrainian has had the benefits to get the training from our Canadian military, $58.4 million allocation. Was that important or not?
Yes, I think the money to support Operation Unifier is important.
Yes.
I want to say thank you to all of you, and certainly I want to say again thank you to the UCC for your advocacy. I know there's been difficult times, and you made a reflection on Canada's involvement with the welcoming of Ukrainians who had to be displaced temporarily for this time. My heart goes on. I had the pleasure of visiting some of our families who have been displaced historically in the last year, and certainly I want to say with all due respect, Canada stands with you, and we will continue. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. With that brings our time together to an end. I want to thank each witness for their contribution and their patience with the way this place works around here. So with that, meeting adjourned.